Is it time to choose your teacher's pet? We'll show you how it's done. It's episode 17, Substitute Teachers Lounge. All right, welcome everybody to episode 17, Substitute Teachers Lounge podcast. Happy you're here with us. I started last week's episode by telling you that the episode we had the week prior was the fastest growing episode we'd ever had. It had multiple listens in just 6 days. Well, it just so happens that the episode we did last week passed it. The episode on confidentiality went past that episode in about 5 days and has already caught up with it. So I'm thankful you're watching that. I hope you learned some things with confidentiality, and I hope you have some things to share with me, as some of you already have. In fact, we've had enough email responses now and various different responses from all the sources. I've always wanted to do a Q&A podcast, and that's basically what we'll dwell on today. Couple things I want to mention to follow up on last week. First of all, I promised you that I would keep track of SubAlert and Jobulator this week to see, start keeping tabs and see which one was truly the fastest. Well, I really wasn't thinking that through because of this. When I told you that, I already had 4 of the 5 days filled for that week, so I really would only get notices for that one day. And then this next week coming up is this area's fall break for the students, so most of them are off the entire week. So I didn't think that through. It wasn't a good time to begin. All I can tell you so far is that there have been 2 alerts. Not a good sample size, but so far SubAlert was fastest on both of those. So what I will do is extend it for at least a couple of weeks, because I don't look for any action next week since most of the teachers and students will be out of town. So look forward to that here soon. Also, let me tell you, we are extremely close to interviewing the co-creators of the podcast I talked about a couple of weeks ago. Since I have a lot of time next week, since school's out of session, we hope to be able to do it then. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you the name because I want you to go ahead and start listening to it. I don't want you to wait a week. The podcast is called Curious Kid Podcast. I've used it in my 6th grade class. It's a great filler for the end. There's some topics that are very interesting. My students both laugh and learn things as they listen to it. I think it's great for 6th grade and lower, and there are some topics that I think the higher grades will love as well. So rather than me stealing too much thunder from those co-creators, which maybe we'll get them on next week. That's what I'm hoping for next week's episode. But I will tell you, go ahead and download or subscribe to Curious Kid Podcast. I think you're going to enjoy it, the format that they use, and maybe that will get you excited on when we interview them for Substitute Teachers Lounge here soon. And again, I don't want to steal their thunder. I want them to be able to tell you everything why they started it, everything they've done with it, and I like it enough that I definitely want to promote it to you guys, so we'll do it soon. First question is the one that our title is based on. The first question says, Greg, be honest, I know you're a nice person, but don't you have a teacher's pet? And on the flip side, don't you have a student that you dread see coming? Yes, this is the way I'll answer that. I would not say that I have a teacher's pet. I do have some students that are probably my favorites, mainly because they were very friendly to me when I first began substitute teaching. They would always come up to me and start a conversation. They would say things like, Mr. Collins, I wish that you were subbing our class today. So those students would be close to the top of my list. But I can't really call them teacher's pet because, to be honest, I've only had them in class a couple of times, and I know them much more through volleyball because when I show up for a match, I actually have, if it's their match, I actually have time to talk to them before the match, and all the players are super friendly. I hope that I'm friendly back with them, and those are the kind of students that I really enjoy. Now, I assume when you're talking about teacher's pet is the one that you pretty much lean on during class all the time, have them help you out, sometimes to the disappointment of other students. Well, I'm going to answer the flip side of the question first, or maybe the second part of the question first. Are there kids that I don't look forward to seeing them come in the class? And you're going to say, Mr. Collins, you don't know what you're talking about, but my answer is really no. I try to consider every kid a challenge. It's funny. I taught a class this week in the gymnasium. I filled in for the gymnasium teacher, very organized teacher. I mean, he even told me what exercises to have them do, and we had a really good day. I got to see all the grades at a middle school. But I did have one teacher before I went in there that said, one of the students that he follows around throughout the day and integrates into some of the other classes, he just wanted me to know that he would be in my class in a certain period. So I made sure I watched for that student. I could say one, I could choose to be anxious about that student's appearance in class, or I could choose to look forward to it. I chose the latter. So most of the time, I kind of dread hearing words like, watch out for this student, because I think you know me well enough that I want to make up my own mind about students. I won't take you back through the stories of about some of the students that I've already shared, but let's suffice it to say that I usually consider it a challenge when I see notes, when I hear conversations from teachers saying that they think this is a troubled student, because I want to make up my own mind. Now, if I do hear that, I make sure I look for that student and see, okay, what's something I can play on to be friendly with him first and then move on from there. And that kind of philosophy has always worked out for me. I will reshare one story. I remember telling you, it was in a very early episode, about how I was walking down a hallway and maybe several students were doing something not terrible, but just things that they were either being too noisy and there were several students involved. And I noticed one particular teacher singled out one particular student. That teacher did not yell at all of them. In fact, they probably didn't really yell, but they didn't discipline all of them, but just one of them. And I found out later that teacher had some trouble with that student. And, I personally try not to do that. I want even the student that has given me the most trouble, I still try to look for the good in that student and see if I can't have them maybe do some things for me, maybe answer some questions for me, maybe better integrate them into the class. So that's what I try to do. I would not say that I have students that I dread see coming. Now, while we're on that end of the topic, let me mention to you, because there was another question, something to the effect of what kind of students' cases. I actually don't like to hear the tattletales. I figure, that's my job to figure out whether a student has misbehaved. I don't, when I hear somebody say something about another student, I will whisper in their ear, or if the situation calls for it, I would just go ahead and say, "It's okay. You don't have to tell me that. Let me figure that out on my own, because I don't want one student ratting out another. That's just the way I am. I know everybody's not like that. That's what I choose to do." So I try my best not to single out certain students for the negative side. Now let's go to the positive side. Do I have students in classes that I always tend to lean on and ask them to do things before I do the others? To be honest, I really think, if I'm honest with myself, the answer again is no. And it's not because I don't have teachers' pets. It's because I choose to have multiple teachers' pets. I try to go out of my way to get all the students involved. In fact, I've started keeping little check marks for classes that I appear at quite often because I want a different student every time. We often run the attendance, have one of the students run the absences to the office. So I keep track of the students that do that. I don't want to have one of them doing it over and over because usually students will try to raise their hands and be the first one to say, Mr. Collins, I'll help you out and take the attendance up to the office. But, I try to single them out, somebody different each time. So I don't really have teachers' pets. I don't have a teacher's pet. I have multiple teachers' pet. That works out best for me. I don't have one student that I ask all the questions to. I don't have one student that I praise all the time. I don't have one student that I make sure that they're the ones that get to do the important things for me while I'm there. I try to hand that out to every student in the classroom. I can tell, especially the ones, now I shouldn't say especially the ones, but including the ones that often are singled out in a certain way, in a negative way, I try to get them involved too. And I can tell they really appreciate that, especially on the younger end, maybe on the middle school end. It's not quite that way in high school sometimes because they're old enough to already have their behaviors and their attitudes mapped out. But I try to get every student involved in every class and not have one teacher's pet, but have multiple teachers' pet. I know some of you will say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I don't think you really feel that way. And maybe it's my pipe dream, but I try to do that, and I try my best not to have one teacher's pet. Will all of my students tell you that I don't have a teacher's pet? Probably not, because in their perception, there's some students that I either talk to or share things with more than other students. But usually that's just because those students come up to me first, so they tend to get seen talking with me more than any other. But that's my stance on teacher's pet. I'm not in favor of singling out one student over the other. In the back of my subconscious, if I have something that really, really important that needs to be done, maybe I'm leaning towards certain students over the others, but I really want to give all of them a shot, so that's what I shoot for. Next question. Mr. Collins, have you ever been embarrassed by anything the students have done, or have you ever embarrassed yourself? Well, as you might expect, in both cases that has happened. Most of the time, I like to make the kids laugh, but I am goofy enough and uncoordinated enough that I don't have to make things up. I've stepped in trash cans in front of them. I've knocked things off. They constantly have to look for paperwork that I leave sitting around the classroom. They actually think that's kind of comical. So in that way, I embarrass myself quite often. It's funny when you say, is there anything that students have ever done to me that embarrasses me? And I'll be honest with you, I'm guessing that when you said that, you were talking about the negative side, and I can't think of any of those. But there are some things that embarrass me because of what they said to me in public places, just from this standpoint. One day when I was teaching for the 6th grade this year, I saw some of the 7th graders who I had taught last year in the 6th grade. They were all assembled in the cafeteria. It was my planning period, so I said, why not? I'm going to walk in there and speak to, sit down at the tables and walk around and speak to them, to as many of them as possible. So I just walked in and started shaking hands. They were smiling. And before I knew it, they were chanting my name. And God bless those children. I think so much of them, but they knew they had embarrassed me. And, of course, I got the whole cafeteria fired up. They were all yelling at me, and I shook as many hands as I can, and I just saw the assistant principal kind of shaking his head but laughing at the same time. So I'm glad they enjoy to have me there. I certainly enjoy being with them. I walked out of the cafeteria before I called too much of a ruckus, but I do think I was, in fact, blushing when I walked out. So they embarrassed me, but in a very good way. And maybe the other thing that embarrassed me just in a single classroom setting, I've always thought that if some of the students tell you that you're their favorite sub, part of that, the biggest part of me loves to hear that, I have to admit, but there's always a part of me that thinks, well, am I still making them learn something, or am I just being a friend? I can't do the latter either. So I was at a class this week, one of the quietest classes I ever had. They were learning, they were working, they were doing real well, and I didn't even think I had said that many things to them, but it was students that I hadn't had before. And finally, one of them looked up at me and said, "Mr. Collins, why are you so nice?" And I'm thinking, well, I enjoy being nice. The way I think about being nice is even when people are mean to you, if you're nice back to them constantly, over and over, it's been my experience that people will come around and all of a sudden treat you nice as well. I've made a lot of friends that way. So it's just been my upbringing. I wasn't great at it when I was younger, maybe, but I've worked on it all my life, and now I'm glad that they consider me a nice person, someone they can talk to about anything. But yet, this example showed me that they got all their work done without me being mean to them. So I was very thankful that that's the way they were looking at it. Next question, Mr. Collins, what are the tactics that you use when you really need to get kids to quieten down? I've got two that have worked real well. One of them, I'll try this one first. Classrooms are often big. You walk over to one side of the room and try to get that side quiet. Then you walk over to the other side of the room and get that side quiet. What I have found out is I don't need to yell at them. I don't need to yell across the room at a particular table. I'm a walker. I am not somebody that goes into a classroom and sits down and barks out orders and plays on my cell phone and just kind of babysits the kids. I actually walk around their tables, especially if they are on some kind of writing project that I think is going to be interesting. They know now, if they've had me before, that I'm going to walk around and read some of those and tell them what I think. And I'm not hokey about it. I'll walk around and try to read as many as I can. I will always find something nice to say that actually means something, like I like this paragraph. I like the way you've written this. I'll say something nice, but then mention, maybe a word they've misspelled. But I'll do that. They know I like to walk around. So the first tactic I do about keeping them quiet is when I see, when I hear one table that's just starting to get a little bit noisy, before I yell at them, before I tell them to quieten down, I just walk over and stand by that table. And I can't remember that ever not working. When they know I'm standing there, they all of a sudden refocus and look back down. And then if I get the same problem on the other side of the classroom, I just do that and get that side to refocus. That works most of the time. But it's funny, I've shared this with you before, but the tactic that works the best is I'll give them 2, maybe 3 warnings in a nice way. Listen, you guys are raising your sound a little bit too much. We don't want to do that anymore, okay? And then if they do it again, I'll say, okay, I'm going to make a deal with you. We're going to be completely quiet for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, that's everybody. I make sure they know that that's not just talking, but if it's my interpretation that a sound they made, whether it's a silly cough or a silly sneeze or something like that, just to get noticed, or tapping on the table, it gets to be my judgment as to whether I think that was on purpose or not, if they're just doing that to get attention. And then I tell them, if you're quiet for those 10 minutes, then you earn the ability to speak quietly to your friends once again, unless you abuse that. And here's what I tell them. If any of you make the sound during the 10 minutes, I will add 5 minutes to that. Now, that puts a little pressure on those students. If they make noises, they don't want the other students in the classroom to also have to give up talking for 5 minutes. So it's kind of a self-policing thing. So I really like doing that. And it's funny, one of my teachers, there's several of the teachers now that I'm very close to. One of them, one of the students in one of the classes that I subbed, told me that they had that their regular teacher was fussing a little bit at their table about making noises. And this particular student said, "Why don't you just do what Mr. Collins does?" And he laughed and said, "What is that?" He makes us be quiet for 10 minutes, and if we make any noise in that 10 minutes, he adds 5 minutes to that. And he laughed and he said, "That sounds pretty good. I think I'll start trying that." So it's kind of funny. That teacher is now, if he was sincere, is using one of the methods that I use in the classroom that just kind of makes sense to me. So those two are the best two things that I have used as far as keeping the students quiet. Next question. Mr. Collins, are there ever any words, not talking about dirty words, but are there ever any words that you won't allow your kids to use in class? I think I've mentioned this before. I would say there is three. Two are kind of silly ones, and one is a more serious one, and I'll tell you why. The first one, I will tell you that it's words that I don't like the kids to use, even if they're trying to help me out. I have heard students tell other students to shut up. I'm not crazy about that phrase. I think it seems so harsh, and you can accomplish the same thing just by saying be quiet. So most of the students know that I will not allow them to use the shut up word in my class. The other one is dummy. I will not allow them to call themselves dummy or stupid. I definitely will not allow them to call other students that. I actually make them apologize when I hear them say something like that, even if they were joking. But that's the two words that are kind of on the silly side. The other one that I've actually discussed in other classes, it's more of a discussion than not letting them use it. But I asked them, when did use of the word realist, realist, being a realist, all of a sudden get converted to a word we use when we want to say something negative about somebody? We don't really use that word properly, in my opinion. If you say tell somebody you think they're being negative, they say, "Oh, I'm just a realist." And all of a sudden, we're using that all the time to just allow us to say something negative about a situation or something else. And I really think that's one of the most abused words in our English language. And I try to open up debates, especially with upper middle school and high school, to see what they think about that. And, I always have some very good discussions about using that word. I'm not crazy about the way we use it today. We use it kind of from the negative side. You very rarely hear a discussion saying I'm a realist that leads to some kind of positive stance on something. So that's one of my pet peeve words. And I can tell I've had the gift of gab at this episode, because as I looked up, we're almost getting to the point where the episodes normally end, about up to that minute marker. So I will ask one more, and I'll save maybe one of the best ones for the end, because I know the reactions to this will be all over the place. Mr. Collins, what do you consider the most controversial thing you've ever done? That's actually pretty easy to me, because I have asked adults what they think of me doing this. I'll tell you what it is in just a moment. And I've gotten mixed reviews. I've had both positives and negatives from my own family, my own friends. Teachers are about 50-50. I think it works well for me. But probably the most controversial thing I have done is letting some of the older students call me by my first name. I know that a lot of you all don't like that. I have found it works well for me. There are a lot of teachers that do the same thing. There are probably more that insist on Mr. or Miss when they're being addressed. And believe me, I'm all about respect, and I think that is fine too. I just think it works well for me. I joke with them that I like to be on a first name basis with them. I don't consider that offensive or disrespectful. There's certain ways they could say Mr. Collins that I could tell they were being disrespectful to me, so I'm not sure just switching to my first name. Now, I try to be conscientious about it. If I know there are maybe teachers that I'm teaching for that I already know don't particularly like that, I won't tell those students that. Most of them know by word of mouth. I think a lot of it comes from me being a referee. I've always allowed players to address me by my first name there as well. I know some of my fellow officials don't like that. Some of them do. Some teachers don't have a problem with it. Even some students do have problems with it. So I leave it up to them. It's funny how I will see them out in public and they can't wait to come up to me and say, "Hi, Greg." And it's just a more friendlier greeting than I think of the static Mr. Collins. So I want you to decide that for your own, of course. But the question was, what's the most controversial thing you've done? And I think that's it. Letting students call me by my first name. I apologize to those of you that think that's something I shouldn't be doing, but that works well for me. It makes me feel more comfortable. It makes me enjoy the class more. I don't feel like I have to be offended if they call me that. Some of them call me Mr. C. Some of them call me Mr. G. And I'm okay with all of that because usually when they do it, well, almost all the time when they do it, it's to ask me a question about something. So I'm glad that they did. So that's probably the most controversial thing I've ever done. I would love to hear your comments about it, just like some of you responded last week when we were talking about confidentiality. So that probably is by a landslide the most controversial thing I've done. I didn't get through all the questions I planned because I just talk too much. I know that. But I hope you will be back next week when we do another episode. We'll do another Q&A episode down the line. So look forward to that. I still have more questions that I didn't get to. We'll have even more by then. If there's ever a certain topic that tends to trend in a certain direction, I will maybe have a special episode that will talk about that. So I hope you've enjoyed it as we've talked through some of these questions. The goal and desire is that this coming week I'm going to try to get to several interviews. If I'm able to do the interviews with the co-founders of Curious Kid Podcast, that will be the episode next week. I'll promise you that. Other people that I get recorded, I will keep those in the back pocket to do in a future episode. But please look forward to that. I hope you've enjoyed episode 17 of the Substitute Teachers Lounge podcast. Just as a reminder, the email address is gregcollinssubstitute@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at SubTeachLounge. And then finally, our Facebook page is growing every day. It is also called Substitute Teachers Lounge. We will see you next week on the podcast. Music provided by Ben Sound.